production function is a function of labor and capital, the two factors of production. In production, goods and services are produced by using the factors of production. The inputs are labor, capital, raw material. So here inputs are related with output, and the function is written like this: Q is a function of labor and capital. So we can go for now two types of analysis: short period analysis and long period analysis. In short period analysis, at least one factor is variable. Suppose we consider labor as a variable factor, capital as a fixed factor. In short period, we find out marginal product of the factor. By marginal product, we mean the contribution of the variable factor to the total production. You can see the production function Q, which is a function of labor, comma, capital bar. Capital bar indicates that capital is constant, labor is variable. Marginal product of labor can be written as del Q by del L. It shows the rate at which output changes with change in the labor input. This is called as the first derivative of production function. If we want to maximize the production, the second derivative should be negative. This is something you have studied in the 12th class also. So for maximum production or productivity, the second derivative is negative. Similarly, we can find out the maximum productivity of the other factor, that is capital. Here, second derivative of the production function with respect to capital will be negative. There is another concept in productivity. This is known as average productivity. We can think of average productivity of labor as well as average productivity of capital. Average productivity is total productivity divided by number of units of variable factor. So it is TP divided by L, that is Q divided by L. Similarly, average productivity of capital will be total production divided by number of units of variable factor capital. So it is Q divided by capital, where capital means the number of units of capital. We have some typical relationship between total product and marginal product. Here we must remember that marginal product is the slope of tangent at any point on the total product curve. In other words, it shows the rate at which total product changes. This is shown in figure 4.1, where we find that the rate at which total product is changing is more in the beginning and less ultimately. This is corresponding to increasing returns and diminishing returns respectively. When I say marginal product is the slope of tangent at any point on the total product curve, we have drawn the tangent. There is a dot shown on the total product curve. The tangent of the theta will give us the value of marginal product at the point where this tangent is touching the total product curve. We can think of the relation between total product and average product also. We know that average product is given by total product divided by the number of units of the variable factor. If you want to find out average product at any point on the total product curve, you have to draw a ray from the origin to the point where we want to estimate the value of average product. In this diagram 4.2, we are estimating the average product at point Q. It is given by the tangent of the angle made by ray from the origin to this point Q. That is QL divided by OL will give us the value of average product at point Q. Now we can show the relationship between average product and marginal product. This can be derived mathematically. This can also be shown by diagram. Marginal product curve cuts average product curve at its maximum point. This is shown in figure number 4.7. Both average product curve and marginal product curve are inverted U-shaped. Marginal product curve is cutting average product at its maximum point from above. That means when AP is rising, MP is greater than AP. When AP is falling, MP is less than AP. When AP is at its maximum point, both AP and MP are equal to each other. How we have derived AP and MP, I have already told you that MP is derived by considering the slope of the tangent at the particular point on the total product curve, and average product is drawn by taking a ray from the origin to the point on total product curve. The slope of this ray will give us the value of average product. We can now show the relationship between AP and MP mathematically. So I am explaining the derivation. This is before your screen. Average product is equal to Q divided by L, total production divided by number of units of variable factor. By quotient rule, we can take the derivative of Q upon L. This is denominator into derivative of numerator minus numerator into derivative of denominator divided by square of the denominator. So it is L into del Q by del L minus Q divided by L square. So partial derivative of average product of labor is equal to del Q by del L multiplied by 1 upon L minus Q upon L square. We can take 1 upon L outside the bracket. Within bracket we get del Q by del L minus Q upon L. Del Q by del L is marginal product of labor, whereas Q by L is average product of labor. This is an important derivation shown by equation number 1. From this equation, we can conclude when derivative of average product of labor is positive, right hand side will be positive, or we can say marginal product of labor will be more than average product of labor. Because we all know L cannot be negative, it is always positive. This implies when average product is rising, that means it is increasing function with positive derivative, marginal product of labor will be more than average product of labor. This is what I shown by using the diagram. Secondly, when derivative of average product of labor is 0, right hand side will be 0. So marginal product of labor will be equal to average product of labor. The third possibility, when the derivative of average product of labor is less than 0, right hand side will be negative. So marginal product of labor will be smaller than average product of labor. So this implies when AP rises, MP is greater. When AP is maximum, both MP and AP are equal. When AP falls, MP is less than AP. So we find that marginal product is always ahead of average product. It rises as well as falls at faster rate in comparison to average product. When average product of a factor rises, we call it increasing returns because marginal productivity is more than average productivity. When average product is constant, it is called as constant return because marginal product is same as average product. And when average product is falling, it is called as diminishing return because marginal product is smaller than average product. We can also find out partial factor elasticity of output. It is symbolically expressed as EQL. It shows the rate at which output changes to the rate at which variable factor labor changes. This is how we can find out the elasticity of output with respect to labor. This is given by del Q by del L multiplied by labor divided by quantity. It is also equal to marginal product of labor, which is del Q by del L, divided by average product of labor, which is reciprocal of L upon Q. Similarly, we can find out capital elasticity of output, which is del Q by del K multiplied by K upon Q. Del Q by del K is marginal product of capital. K upon Q is the reciprocal of average product of capital. So partial capital elasticity or elasticity of output with respect to capital is MPK divided by APK. When average product of labor is showing increasing function, that means average product of labor rises, partial elasticity of output will be greater than 1. When average product of labor is at its maximum point, that means there is no change, partial elasticity of output with respect to labor will be 1. And when average product of labor is falling, elasticity of output with respect to labor will be smaller than 1. This can also be explained by taking the derivative of average product of labor, which on simplification gives us Q upon L square within bracket del Q by del L into L upon Q minus 1, which is same as Q upon L square within bracket elasticity of output with respect to labor minus 1. So this second equation is also important, which is derived in a similar way. We have already explained through derivation of marginal product of labor and average product of labor from total product that whenever AP falls, MP is less than AP. That means it is below average product of labor. This can be compared by considering this figure 4.4, where we are comparing the value of average product and marginal product at a given point on total product. It is shown by dot on the total product. Marginal product is given by the slope of the tangent at this point. Average product of labor is given by the slope of the ray from the origin to this point. We find that when AP falls, MP is below it. That means theta angle is smaller than other angle shown in this diagram. So marginal product of labor will be less, which is shown by tangent of the theta in comparison to average product. So when average product of labor rises, tangent theta will be greater. That means marginal product will be greater than average product in the case of increasing returns. In the case of constant returns, both marginal product and average product will be equal to each other. So for constant returns, TP will be rising at constant rate. Both marginal product and average product will be given by slope of this line. So tangent theta and tangent alpha will be same in this figure 4.6. So marginal product of labor will be equal to average product of labor in the case of constant returns. In other cases, we have already explained and understood this relationship between AP and MP. There is a concept called as isoquant. Iso means equal, quant means quantity. This curve is similar to indifference curve discussed under consumer behavior. Isoquant is actually a locus of combinations of labor and capital that produce the same level of output. Shape of isoquant is like this, shown in figure number 4.9. Slope of isoquant is given by delta K upon delta L. That is change in capital, which is on the vertical axis, divided by change in labor, which is shown on the horizontal axis. We all know that when we are on the isoquant, there is no change in output. So delta L multiplied by marginal product of labor will be equal to delta K multiplied by marginal product of capital. Delta L means the number of units of labor lost or number of units of labor gained. So suppose we assume that we are losing capital. So the output lost because of loss in number of units of capital equals to delta K will be equal to delta K multiplied by MPK. Delta K is the number of units of capital lost. MPK is the marginal product of capital. That means contribution of every individual capital unit. So the total loss in output is given by delta K multiplied by MPK. And the total gain in output, because labor is rising, will be given by delta L multiplied by MPL. That is the number of units of labor added multiplied by MPL, which shows the contribution of labor. So when you simplify this, you will get delta K divided by delta L is equal to MPL upon MPK. So this ratio delta K upon delta L is nothing but it is showing the slope of isoquant, which is equal to marginal product of labor divided by marginal product of capital. And this is also called as marginal rate of technical substitution. You must have heard about marginal rate of substitution in the consumer behavior theory. That was marginal utility of one commodity divided by marginal utility of other commodity. So quite similar to that, the slope of isoquant is MPL divided by MPK, which is equal to marginal rate of technical substitution. It is negative because slope is negative and the isoquant is downward sloping. This downward slope is being shown in figure 4.10. This is showing the curvature of isoquant, which is convex to the origin, similar to indifference curve, which is also convex to the origin. And we have economic region of isoquants. Economic region of isoquants means the region in which rational producer should produce. And this region is corresponding to that portion of isoquant where marginal productivity of labor and marginal productivity of capital both are positive. This happens from point A to point B in figure number 4.12. Beyond point A, marginal productivity of capital is negative because of too much use of capital. Beyond B, marginal capital may be having positive productivity, but labor is having negative productivity. So we should produce only between A and B, where marginal productivity of both the factors are positive. This is called as economic region of production, and we should not produce beyond A or beyond B. So when we join all such points like A and B, we get two curves starting from the origin OR1 and OR2. These are called as ridge lines. This line, we call it in economics, but it is a curve. It is meeting the various isoquants at some points, and wherever this ridge line is meeting the isoquant, marginal productivity of one of the factor is 0. Along the upper ridge line, that is OR1, marginal productivity of capital is 0 because of too much use of capital. Along the lower ridge lines, marginal productivity of labor is 0. So area enclosed between upper and lower ridge lines is called as economic region of production. The properties of isoquants are similar to the properties of indifference curve. They never intersect each other, so that only one isoquant will pass through a given point. Secondly, isoquants are downward sloping, assuming positive marginal productivity of both the factors. Then isoquants are convex to the origin, and higher isoquants implies higher output level. Isoquants may be linear. That implies perfect substitution between the two factors of production. It is similar to the case when two commodities are perfect substitutes. Indifference curves are straight line with constant marginal rate of substitution. So in case of linear isoquants, marginal rate of technical substitution, that is the slope of isoquant, will be constant. Isoquants may be L-shaped. This happens when the two factors are perfect complements to each other. This implies there is only one method of production. If we only increase labor, there will not be any increase in the production. If we only increase the capital quantity, we are not able to change the output level. That means we remain on the same isoquant. We can only reach higher isoquants by simultaneous increase in the quantity of labor and capital. And here the two factors are combined in the fixed ratio. Next concept is elasticity of factor substitution. This is the ratio of percentage change in capital labor ratio to the percentage change in marginal rate of technical substitution. And this marginal rate of technical substitution is nothing but is the marginal productivity of labor divided by marginal productivity of capital. That will give us MRTS L for K. That means labor substitutes capital. We all know that whenever out of the two factors, one factor becomes relatively cheaper, then that factor will be substituted for relatively expensive factor. This is the reason how there will be change in the capital employment ratio. And when one of the factor become relatively cheaper, there will be change in the price ratio of the factor that will be same as marginal productivity ratio in equilibrium. And this marginal productivity ratio is same as MRTS. So elasticity of factor substitution is the ratio of percentage change in capital labor ratio divided by percentage change in MRTS. By using differential calculus, percentage change in capital labor ratio will be change in capital labor ratio divided by original capital labor ratio, and percentage change in MRTS, that is the ratio of marginal productivity, which can be written as change in FL upon FK. And FL upon FK means marginal productivity of labor divided by marginal productivity of capital. And this is divided by FL upon FK. So the formula of elasticity of factor substitution is change in capital labor ratio divided by change in FL FK ratio multiplied by original FL FK ratio divided by capital labor ratio. So I am repeating, FL FK ratio means marginal productivity of labor divided by marginal productivity of capital. In logarithmic form, it is same as d log K by L divided by d log FL upon FK. Returns to scale, that is the long run analysis of the production. In the case of constant returns to scale, percentage change in output is same as the percentage change in input. That is, for 1% change in output, there is 1% change in input. For decreasing returns to scale, percentage change in output is less than the percentage change in input. For increasing returns to scale, percentage change in output will be more than the percentage change in input. Diagram 4.16 shows constant returns to scale. Where on x-axis we are increasing the labor quantity from L to 2L, then to 3L. On the y-axis we are changing the quantity of capital from 1K to 2K, then to 3K. In this figure, we are changing labor by 1 unit every time, and we are also changing capital by 1 unit every time, and the production is also increased by 1 unit every time. So proportionate change in output and input is the same. This is how we can say it is a case of constant returns to scale. In case of decreasing returns to scale, the gap between the successive isoquants will keep on rising. That means for equal increase in output, we will require inputs in greater quantity. In case of increasing returns to scale, the gap between successive isoquants will keep on decreasing. That shows for equal increase in output, we will require increase in input by lesser and lesser amount. Now we have the concept of homogeneous production function. By homogeneous production function, we consider production function Z, which is a function of X and Y. Suppose we increase both the factors X and Y by a multiple T, and suppose also output is multiplied by some exponent of T. If such is the case, we say it is called as homogeneous production function of degree n. So if output is multiplied by, say, n power to the multiple T by which every input is increased, this will be called as homogeneous production function of degree n. When n is equal to 1, that means we are increasing the input by T and output is also increased by T. This is a case of constant returns to scale. That means homogeneous production function of degree 1. When the degree of homogeneous function is more than 1, the increase in output will be more than increase in input. So there will be increasing returns to scale. And when n is less than 1, increase in output will be by lesser proportion than increase in input. It will show decreasing returns to scale. We are having Cobb-Douglas production function Q, which is equal to A L raised to power alpha K raised to power beta. We are increasing labor and capital by factor T, which is more than 0. So we find A T raised to power alpha, L raised to power alpha, T raised to power beta, K raised to power beta. On simplification, we get T raised to power alpha plus beta, A L raised to power alpha, K raised to power beta. This is equal to T raised to power alpha plus beta into Q. This is called as homogeneous production function of degree alpha plus beta. When alpha plus beta is equal to 1, we have constant returns to scale. When alpha plus beta is less than 1, we have diminishing returns to scale. When alpha plus beta is more than 1, there will be increasing returns to scale. This homogeneous production function is a special case of homothetic production function. Production function shows the relationship between input and output in physical terms. But cost function shows the same relationship between input and output in monetary terms. We all know that in the case of production function, on x-axis we take inputs, that means factors of production. On y-axis we show output. Both are in physical terms. In the case of cost, what we show on x-axis, we are showing the output. On y-axis we are showing the cost, and cost means expenses incurred on the various factors of production. So it means when you show the cost function, on one axis you are showing the output in physical terms, on other axis you are showing cost, that means input in monetary terms. So in the case of cost, we are showing the same relationship, input output relationship, but the only difference is in the case of production it is shown in physical terms. In case of cost it is shown in monetary terms. In the case of production function, x-axis shows input, y-axis shows output. In the case of cost, x-axis shows output, y-axis shows input as input expenses, that is also called as cost. In the case of cost, we are using the symbol W for wage rate of labor, and R is used rent per unit of capital. So in the case of production function, we are using L and K for number of units of labor and capital. In the case of cost, we are using W and R, that is the corresponding payment made to these factors. W, wage rate per unit of labor, R, rent per unit of capital. Cost function is written like this: C is equal to WL plus RK. C stand for cost, W stand for wage rate, L stand for the number of units of labor, R stand for capital rate, K stand for the number of units of capital. So WL is cost incurred on labor, RK implies the cost incurred on capital. We can hold any particular thing cost as constant. C is equal to C bar. So we can get the value of K, or we can get the value of labor. And when we write this function like this, it becomes cost function, where capital becomes a function of cost. And similarly, we can correlate labor with cost. So that means we can transform production function into cost function. The equation 1, which is before you, that shows ISO cost line. I think you remember in the case of indifference curve, we have budget line concept. Budget line concept means all points on the budget line shows the same budget or the same income, which is spent on the two commodities. Similarly, ISO cost line shows same cost at every point on the cost line. That means we are assuming the prices of the two factors constant and the total cost incurred remains the same. So this ISO cost line is downward sloping straight line with slope W upon R. It is similar to the budget line, which is also downward sloping, meeting X and Y axis, and the slope of the budget line is price of factor or commodity shown on the x-axis divided by price of commodity shown on the y-axis. So we are having ISO cost lines. As we move to the right, with the same prices of the two factors, the total cost keeps on rising. And the slope of these lines given by W upon R will remain the same, because there is no change in wage rate, there is no change in rate of interest. We have discussed isoquant. Isoquant means a curve showing various combinations of two factors of production such that output remains the same. So when we draw a given isoquant, and given isoquant means given output level, and in this case it is Q bar, and we are showing various iso cost line. This iso cost line C1 touches the given isoquant at point E. This is called as producer equilibrium. That is, the given output Q bar can be produced at the least possible cost given by iso cost line C1, and this is called as optimal cost output condition. Here we are employing OL bar or OL star units of labor and OK star units of capital. We can have various cost output combinations. All such combinations are optimal, and these optimal combinations are shown by the point of contact between the isoquant and the iso cost line. In the short run, cost has two components, fixed and variable cost. In the long run, it has only variable component. So it starts from origin, keeps on rising. When you use auto for a drive, even when you take a cab for a drive, there is some minimum amount that you have to pay. Then according to the distance traveled, the total payment to be made keeps on rising. So that is something that happens in the short period. Some fixed component, some variable component. But when you go for long trip, maybe say outstation trip, then your charges are levied on the basis of the kilometers. No fixed charges in most of the cases. So that is something that happens in the long run. So suppose you travel 1000 kilometers in the outstation trip and kilometer charges are say 15 rupees. So the total amount you have to pay is 15,000 rupees. Where highest possible isoquant touches the iso cost line. In diagram number 5.6, we show various short run total cost curves. These are all starting assuming some fixed cost OC bar. So long run total cost curve is actually drawn by taking the minimum points of the various short run total cost curve. It is tangential to various short run total cost curve. So that means when you want to produce something in the long run, you would like to produce all levels of output at the minimum possible cost. So that means to produce different levels of output, we are using different corresponding plant sizes, but the per unit cost is going to be the minimum possible in the case of long run. In the traditional theory, we have a division of total cost between total variable cost and total fixed cost. TC is equal to TVC plus TFC. Then you divide both sides by quantity. You will be able to get average cost. So average cost will be equal to average variable cost plus average fixed cost. So average fixed cost is total fixed cost divided by output. Average variable cost is total variable cost divided by output. And average total cost is total cost divided by output. Marginal cost is addition to total cost when one additional unit of output is produced. So it is equal to change in total cost divided by change in quantity. In partial derivative terms, it is del TC divided by del Q. We are using partial derivative here. And the derivative of total cost is same as the derivative of total variable cost, because total variable cost changes but total fixed cost doesn't changes. So in total cost, we have both the component fixed cost as well as variable cost. So there is change in only variable cost. So change in total cost is same as the change in variable cost with quantity. You can look at figure number 5.7, where we are deriving average fixed costs from total fixed costs. In the upper panel, total fixed cost has been shown. which is fixed for every level of production. If you want to find out average fixed cost, it is given by the slope of ray from the origin to the point. Suppose at P point, you want to find out the value of average fixed cost. It is equal to the slope of OP, and slope of OP is given by PQ1 divided by OQ1. Similarly, when you move to points S, the average fixed cost at point S will be given by slope of ray from the origin OS. It is equal to SQ2 divided by OQ2. When you want to estimate the average fixed cost at point R, it is given by slope of OR, that is RQ3 divided by OQ3. The slopes of ray from the origin OP, OS and OR keep on declining, because we know slope of any line is given by perpendicular upon base, that is tangent theta. This theta is declining when we are moving from P to S then to R. So that means the value of average fixed cost keeps on declining. So corresponding to point P, S and R, we find out AFC, which is given in the lower segment of the diagram P, S and R. When you join these 3 points, you will get AFC, average fixed cost. This keeps on declining. Average fixed cost always declines. It is neither meeting x or y axis, but it is asymptotic to both x and y axis. When quantity is very high, AFC becomes very low, because AFC TFC divided by quantity. In the same way, we can find out AVC, average variable cost, from total variable cost. You can look at figure 5.8, where we have derived AVC from TVC. AVC is TVC divided by quantity. So you want to find out the value of AVC at different points, say P, S and R. It is given by the slope of OP, OS and OR. And the slope of OP, OS and OR are given by tangent of the angle made by these lines with the positive x-axis. It is clear that this theta falls in the beginning, rises thereafter. So tangent theta, which is giving us the slope of total variable cost, is declining in the beginning, falls in the beginning, rises thereafter. This is how average variable cost is U-shaped, because we all know that tangent theta keeps on rising when theta values start from 0 to 90 degree. And since this theta value is falling from P to S, then rises when we move from S to R. So AVC falls in the beginning, rises thereafter, it becomes U-shaped. Similarly, you can think of the way you can derive average cost from total cost. The shape of TC and TVC are similar. So in the same way, we can derive average cost also, which is also going to be U-shaped, shown in figure 5.9. If you want to understand how to derive the marginal cost curve, then you will have to draw tangents at different points on the total cost curve. Again, we will find that when you are moving from P to V, then to S, then this theta value will fall in the beginning, then rises thereafter. So the slope of total cost will be becoming lesser in the beginning, rise thereafter. So MC will also be U-shaped. This is how we can derive MC from TC. This is the geometrical explanation of the derivation of various average and marginal cost curve from the total cost curves. In figure 5.12, we have drawn all these curves. AVC, AC, both are U-shaped. Even MC is also U-shaped. It is cutting AVC and ATC at their respective minimum point in that order. The gap between ATC and AVC is coming down, and this is gap is same as AFC. We all know that AFC is highest in the beginning, keeps on declining as we produce more and more. So the gap between average total cost and average variable cost keeps on declining as we produce more and more. There is another explanation why AC and MC are U-shaped. This is according to the different stages of the law of variable proportion. When there are increasing returns, the per unit cost and marginal cost decline. When there are diminishing returns, these costs rise. Now, theory of cost in the long run. For this purpose, you can refer to figure number 5.13. This figure shows various short-term average cost curve, SAC1, SAC2, SAC3. These different short-term average cost curves are corresponding to different plant sizes: small, medium, and large size of the plant. If you want to produce very less quantity, you should use small plant. If you want to produce more quantity, you can use medium size and large size plant accordingly. We can derive long run average cost curve from various short run average cost curves. Long run average cost shows the minimum possible per unit cost of producing various levels of output in the long period. We may be producing any output level at higher cost or higher per unit cost in the short period, but our objective will be to produce the output at lower per unit cost in the long run. Many companies offer many schemes. They even offer free samples in the short period. So there may be increasing cost in the short period, but the objective of the firm is to produce different output levels at the minimum possible cost in the long period. So if you want to derive the long run average cost curve, it will be obtained by selecting the lowest possible segments of the various short run average cost curve. This long run average cost curve will be touching various short run average cost curves, but it is not necessary that long run average cost curve will be touching the minimum point of different short run average cost curve. The only thing to remember is long run average cost curve will be touching various short run average cost curves. That means you have to produce various output levels in the long run at the minimum possible cost in the long period. So suppose you want to produce output level OQ1 dash. When you are using SAC1 plant, the cost is BQ1 dash. But when you are using SAC2, cost curve corresponding to another plant size, the per unit cost is CQ1 dash. Very important thing to remember and note that when we are operating at point B, we are minimizing the cost in the short period, but we are incurring higher per unit cost, BQ1 dash. But when we are operating at point C on SAC2, that means another plant, we are not minimizing the cost by producing at point C. We are operating at the falling portion of SAC2, but the per unit cost is CQ1 dash, that is lesser than BQ1 dash. So our objective is not to minimize the cost in the short period. Our objective is to produce different output levels at the minimum possible cost. So please do remember that long run average cost curve is tangential to short run average cost curve, but it is not necessary that it should pass through the minimum points of various short run average cost curves. Now, since it is so, we call LAC curve or long run average cost curve as envelope curve. All short run average cost curves are enclosed in the long run average cost curve. No portion of short run average cost curve is below long run average cost curve, or no portion of long run average cost curve is above short run average cost curve. So whenever we are using envelope, it is the outside boundary. So similarly, long run average cost curve is outside boundary of short run average cost curve. Now let us discuss long run marginal cost curve. In order to derive long run marginal cost curve, we have to draw a complicated diagram. We have to draw at least 3 short run average cost curves, 3 short run marginal cost curves, long run average cost curve. So after drawing these minimum 7 curves, we can draw long run marginal cost curve. We all know the relationship between marginal cost and average cost curve. So short run marginal cost curve should pass through the minimum point of corresponding short run average cost curve. Look at figure 5.15. At point A, short run average cost is same as long run average cost. So corresponding to this point, short run marginal cost should be same as long run marginal cost curve. So this is how we get 1 point for the long run marginal cost. Similarly, we consider another point M, where SAC is equal to SMC. So corresponding to this output level OQ2, LAC will also be equal to LMC. So LMC will pass through this point M. Similarly, there is a point where SMC C3 and SAC3 are touching each other, both are equal. So corresponding to that level of output, OQ3, LMC will be same as LAC. So this is how we get the third point for LMC. When you join all these 3 points of, we get what is called as LMC, that is long run marginal cost curve. Next topic is economies of scale. In the long run, we get economies of scale, which may be explaining the U shape of LAC curve. Because of these economies, the per unit cost declines, so LAC curve falls. And because of diseconomies, ultimately per unit costs rise. This is how LAC rises. When economies and diseconomies counterbalance each other, we have minimum point of LAC. In modern theory, constant theory or constant returns to scale occur for a longer period of time, so we have saucer-shaped LAC curve. In the case of traditional theory, we have a concept that is called as excess capacity. And excess capacity implies that we are operating at the falling portion of average cost curve. The gap between the ideal capacity and the actual capacity utilization is called as excess capacity. This excess capacity is unplanned. But in the case of modern theory, we have reserve capacity. That is something which we create deliberately. That is why under modern theory, average fixed cost also falls in the beginning, but because of deliberate and planned creation of reserve capacity for which additional cost is incurred, results into rising total fixed cost. So AFC starts rising corresponding to the reserve capacity and again starts coming down. So up to certain points it is declining, then again rising because of creation of excess capacity, leading to additional expenditure on the fixed inputs. then again it starts coming down because the same fixed cost is spread over to more and more number of units. This is also leading to saucer shaped AVC, and this is how the constant returns occur for a longer period of time. So when AVC is constant, both AVC and MC are equal. In the case of traditional theory, it happens at one point, but in the case of modern theory, it happens for a range. This range, during which AVC and MC are constant, is called as reserve capacity under modern theory of cost. This is different from excess capacity under traditional theory, where we are producing below ideal capacity. So this gap which you see in figure number 5.19 shows excess capacity, the difference between ideal capacity OXM and actual utilization OX. This is shown in the upper panel of the diagram. In the lower panel, we are showing the reserve capacity. That shows the per unit cost remains at the lowest level for a range of output from OX1 to OX2. Like when we use our scooter and bike, we have some reserve petrol. Such kind of deliberate and planned arrangement is called as reserve capacity in economics under theory of cost. You can look at the shape of TFC, TVC, TC with constant returns. TFC is parallel to x-axis, TVC and TC are parallel to each other. The gap between the two will show the total fixed cost. We have also explained the derivation of SAC and AFC under traditional theory. In the same way, we can derive it under modern theory also. In the modern theory, generally it is believed that the firm operates between 2/3 and 3/4 of the reserve capacity. So utilization of plant has to be at least 2/3 of the reserve capacity. Under modern theory, we can avoid even diminishing returns to scale, in which case LMC will be below LAC. When we avoid only diminishing returns to scale and there are constant returns to scale, LAC and LMC will be like this. They will be equal to each other corresponding to reserve capacity. Before that, LAC will be above LMC. Now we come to the last chapter from producer behavior. This is production economics. Production function can acquire different shapes. In case of perfect substitutes, it will be downward sloping straight line with negative slope. In case of perfect complement, it will be L-shaped. In both the cases, it is linear, but normally it is convex to the origin, as shown in figure 6.1 A, B, and C. When the two factors are perfect complements, we can say that these factors are combined in fixed ratio. And here we will say quantity of output produced is equal to minimum of AK BL. You know that when we are using the two factors as perfect complements, if you add one of the factors without adding the other factor, it is not going to add output. So output is decided by the minimum of the two factors used. Like in consumer theory, when you are having 3 pair of shoes, when you have another additional shoe of the left leg, it is not going to add to your satisfaction level unless you have shoe of the other leg also. Similarly, in the case of production theory also, when we increase labor without increasing capital, our output doesn't change. So output is decided by the minimum of the two factors used. Cobb-Douglas production function. Q is a function of labor and capital. It is given by A, K raised to power alpha, K, L raised to power beta. This Cobb-Douglas production function exhibits increasing constants or diminishing returns to scale as clear from 6.4. When alpha plus beta is equal to 1, there will be constant returns to scale. When it is more than 1, there will be increasing returns to scale. When it is less than 1, there will be diminishing returns to scale. We can find out the elasticity of substitution of Cobb-Douglas production function. It is equal to 1. It can be derived in a way we already discussed under Cobb-Douglas production function. Then we have constant elasticity of substitution production function, which have same elasticity of substitution in every situation. Cobb-Douglas production function is also one of the extreme case of constant elasticity of substitution production function, because its elasticity of substitution is one same at every point. When technical production takes place, output level rises. This technical progress may be neutral. That means it affects both the factors equally. It may be capital augmenting technical production, where capital is affected more in comparison to labor. In case of labor augmenting technical progress, labor is affected more as a result of technical progress. We can also maximize the profit by taking the difference between total revenue and total cost. Total revenue is the product of price and quantity. We have to get the first derivative equating to 0. That gives us the first order condition MR equal to MC. The second derivative should be negative for profit maximization. The objective of producer is either to maximize the profit or to minimize the cost, or both. We can use Lagrangian multiplier also, where we have to consider some objective, which may be maximization of output. We have to consider the constraint, which may be cost constraint, or alternatively, we can have minimization of cost like WL plus RK, where we have to achieve some output level. So by using Lagrangian multiplier, we can find out the various values of input such that we are minimizing the cost. In the case of dual problem, we are converting maximization into minimization objective. We all study about maximization of output by achieving the highest possible isoquant subject to given cost or outlay shown by the ISO cost line. Or we can go for minimization of cost, where some output is to be achieved and we have to consider the minimum possible ISO cost line. So the purpose of dual is to convert the minimization problem to maximization and vice versa. That is cost minimization to output maximization and vice versa.